The Dakota Proclamation by Meredith Quinn, Musa. Page 80. Bureau of Indian Affairs. Blame the goat. The most attacked government agency existing is the Bureau of Indian Affairs, blamed for almost everything that happens to the Indian. In fact, everyone is trying to abolish this agency. It is in fact a tool which is used to carry out the wishes of the President and the Secretary of the Interior. Even Edgar S. Conn, in his book, Our Brother's Keeper, states that the Indian, even though he hates the Bureau, will not let it go. Why? People are under the concept that anything has got to be better than the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Well, if you abolish the Bureau, all that has happened is that you made room for some other organization to take over the money-making problem of the Indian. You have only removed the tool, but the law that governs the Indian remains the same, strong as ever, getting stronger every day. The Indian of Palm Springs, California, were taken over by the Bureau, which is all that is needed to prove that the practicing of attorneys in handling guardianship cases of these Indians is the grade or standards that should not be practiced by men of law, whose responsibility is to act in the best interests of their clients. So, as bad as the Bureau of Indian Affairs is, it is better than the attorneys who handled Indian problems in the past. What few people realize is that the Bureau of Indian Affairs is the United Nations of the Indian, because the Indian won the wars between the United States and themselves. It is an agency that is supposed to keep the subjects of the United States from creating another war with the Indians. No other government agency has so much power to move on the behalf of the Indian, if the Indian only knew how it works. This agency is broad in its functions. It moves like an independent nation because it represents independent nations. It has characteristics of having executive, judicial, and legislative systems, which cannot be questioned by the courts. It has buried every political move since 1775 AD, when it was under the Continental Congress. It was transferred to the War Department in 1824. For 25 years, this was a bloody term to be under. However, in 1949, it was moved to the Department of the Interior, where it remains to this day. If you think the War Department was bloody, the Indian still stands a better chance under the War Department, because any armed force of any nation or country understands a very simple law. When it strikes and you get beat, leave it alone. This same simple law now applies to the United States government when dealing with other world powers. Yes, its biggest fear is Indian reservations, which have always had military bases near. They have no experiences recorded that will stop an Indian tribe when it goes to war. This quite peaceful Indian does not count on numbers. If you should ever stop in Washington, D.C., visit the main office and have a chat with the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, who will probably be Indian. Just remember, as he stands, he is acting as a traitor to his people. This commissioner has a deputy, associate, 4 assistants, 2 personal assistants, and an information officer. The 2 personal assistants act as advisors, but the information officer is a real corker, because he's busy making little pamphlets showing everything I say is a big fat lie. He has a beautiful system on the Indian. By statute, he is protected and does not have to tell any truths as he prepares speeches, publications, and press releases. Of course, he has several $1 million to do his thing, while I have only a couple. There are 10 offices: Washington, D.C., Aberdeen, Gallup, Phoenix, Portland, Onondaga, Juneau, Minneapolis, Muskogee, and Sacramento. There are a little over 60 Indian agencies and some 450 minor installations. This bureau has 3 major functions which it has failed to do. 1. To protect the resources of the Indian. 2. Conduct activities of building and maintaining roads, irrigation, wells, stock tanks, schools, and welfare and record keeping. 3. Encourage and help the Indian develop his potentials. The Indian sovereignty is kept alive by 389 treaties, but the agency that is to fulfill the obligations of the defeated, which is the United States, because of ignorance on the part of the Indian brought on by history that is distorted, attorneys that must protect the government by allegiance, and government agencies that must hide the true conditions of relations due the American Indian, 5,000 statutes, 2,000 federal court decisions, more than 500 attorney general opinions, 95 tribal constitutions, and 74 tribal charters, all controlled by the Secretary of the Interior, which the Bureau is under, having no room to protect the Indian. The Hoover Commission was the first to want the Bureau under the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare somewhere in 1949. Well, today we've learned that the Secretary of HEW received the control of Indian health sometime in 1954, and it is now short of open genocide. Even 2/3 of Indian education is in the hands of health, education, welfare. What do we have? The highest school dropout rates, a 7th grade educational level, the highest infant mortality rate, the highest suicide rate, the shortest lifespan, and starvation on the upswing. Too much has been written about the Bureau already, but the important thing is that it's only a tool to carry out orders. But let's look at the shortcomings of the Bureau. Cannot protect the Indian. I was asked to help the Indians with their fishing rights in the state of Washington. Arriving at the Nisqually Indian Reservation on a Sunday in January 1971, having no idea that there was in fact fishing rights trials going on. The first trial was in progress, which turned out to be the Puyallup fishing rights trial. The city of Tacoma and the judges had secured all courtrooms to bring to trial 57 Indians on the charges of failing to disperse from unlawful assembly. These were Indians fishing from Indian land under fishing rights upheld and recognized by the Supreme Court for at least 17 years. The trials were to run from January through September so that all would be convicted and sentenced. Puyallup Indian land is located in the city of Tacoma, about 3 or 4 acres. Nisqually Reservation is only 2.5 acres, but has a mighty big reputation fighting the whole system of U.S. Senator Jackson and the machinery of Washington State. The 3 persons on trial were having some interesting problems. 1, they could not present evidence on their own behalf, which is federal law when it deals with Indian rights. 2, question of Indian fishing rights jurisdiction and permitted into court procedures. Correct, federal law. 3, the evidence of the sheriff and capitan of the Tacoma police force found to be non-correct could not be used as weighting evidence. Correct federal law. What was even more astonishing, the entire arrests made by the Tacoma police were on file. Color, no less, which the judge would not permit in the courtroom. The prosecution stated that the arrests were made without any physical confrontations, yet the motion pictures showed tear gas barrage after barrage, uniformed police in full army dress, machine guns, rifles with telescopic sights, army weapons pointed at unarmed Indians, and gun and fish sportsmen with patches on their jackets, swinging clubs at Indians on Indian land. Remember, this is an act of aggression against an independent, sovereign Indian nation. The files, when shown, look like a sequence out of World War II news releases. All the numbers brought to the witness stand by the prosecution were identified in the files, all of them. The only persons missing in the arrests were Russian and Chinese foot soldiers. Another interesting fact, all attorneys from Tacoma were attending an American bar in Seattle on the day of arrests. Next time you see John Wayne riding over the hills, guns blasting, tell him to go try it on some real Indians. The results of the first case were that all these were convicted. In the meantime, John Vigil and some other Indians awaiting trial cornered me and said, "Quinn, you talk a lot of legal hocus pocus. Let's see you use it in a court of law. I'm placing my life into your hands." I stood speechless in shock, unable to move. Up to this time, in my activities as an Indian activist, were only to collect and evaluate information and run. My ability to stay alive was behind the wheel of a car. If cornered, I would charge going for broke. The car became a home, office, research library, and a place of safety. Let someone else stand up and face the shooting. Information was my ability. Don't get me wrong, I've had my share of plugging up bullet holes in the body with your shirt tail. Thankful it worked. Having been named the walking encyclopedia of the Indian problem, to be able to tell Indians how to fight their problem was enough to watch out for your life, was knowing that death by person or persons unknown was no chance situation but a fact of life. So you want to pick your way of dying. For me, it was to be traveling over 100 miles an hour so that when the impact of the bullet striking and that warm, suspended feeling that creeps over your body, turning seconds into hours, making the whole world move in slow motion, keeping busy, could make it so much easier. But in the courtroom you were asked to stop, to leave your car and face the enemy in the open field. It went against everything you believed in to stay alive. I conceded to try. We started out by presenting the judge with a statement of improper defense. We showed no attorney could touch the Indian problem, and we told the judge that he could not protect attorneys if they tried, citing 43 USCA 1460 and 1464. All defendants went on a per se basis after a 3-hour recess. Because of the statement, the judge recognized me as consultant to the defense. Next, the judge stated that the jurisdiction question would not be permitted into the courtroom. No evidence would be permitted in the court procedures. Some attorneys in Seattle spent all night going through habeas corpus, writs, contempt charges, fines, bails, and how to force a judge to sign writs. We hit the law library every morning for new ideas, and there was our judge getting his new ideas. This was a good experience for me because now the secret of how to arrest judge off his own bench when it deals with a judge intimidates an Indian in a court of law gave us an edge to win. Many times we would have the judge stuck in a legal move, and just before we could have closed down the courtroom, the judge made his way out. It wasn't until I noticed the attorneys who were permitted to remain with us at the table of the defendants were having dinner with the prosecution attorneys did it become clear that they stick together whenever a situation endangered their profession. By this time, we were getting pretty good. The judge would throw a legal move, and we would block by throwing another statute, keeping him crawling up the walls. We knew the Indian could not beat the charges because the law on Indian rights has never been permitted to be a question for Indians to present in any court of law, so we had to break the system. There should have been a mistrial called twice, just on jury selection alone. But thanks to those attorneys left at our table, we got down to the business of educating the jury on the lack of rights of the Indian in a courtroom to enter his complaints. Our evenings were spent at the Nisqually Indian Reservation, where vigilants were running all over the place. We called outside of the state of Washington, who sent telegrams to the President and the United Nations. They also contacted the news services, UPI, AP, and others. They in turn contacted their news services within the state of Washington. They were told there was nothing going on. Even the Bureau of Indian Affairs said nothing was wrong. The state was closed, blacked out. Nothing was going out and nothing was coming in, but a small band of Indians taking the structure of law apart in the state of Washington and putting it back together again. Go back to the preface, page 4 of this book, and read up on the legal finds we pulled out from the courtroom. One Indian was shot, and the law tried to say that it was self-inflicted. This is just one incident where the Bureau of Indian Affairs could not or even consider protecting the lives, rights, or safety of Indians within any given state. The Indian, even after this, cannot let go of the Bureau because it is the only way he can get his sovereignty back. But the great thing about it was that we won. To all that read this, I know you have heard about the conspiracy trials of the Chicago 7 and the Seattle 8, but none of you heard about the Tacoma 57. Indians who did their own legal work won the biggest conspiracy trial ever. And the media was frozen against us. I have won a conspiracy trial, and until you have faced the law when it must give justice and it refuses, you will not have seen freedom and reason leave that court of law. It hides the most gruesome secret that anyone can picture: conviction and sentencing at no cost. There is no room or right, even if you can prove that the law was in error, to make the law admit its error.